Welcome to Nathanaeum's High Feast. I'm Father Timothy Eck. This week we celebrate the 33rd Sunday in Ordinary Time on November 16th, 2025. You can find today's readings in the show notes. May the Lord who feeds us at his altar bless you through his word.
How do you see the world? In both our first reading and our gospel, we have scenes of strife and destruction which are then paired with promises of salvation and blessing. How do we see these two coming together? Because in both situations, both come about from the same action, destruction and blessing, at the same time. To understand this, we'll begin with Malachi, where we heard of a prophecy of some future day where fire will consume the evildoers and proud. And at the same time, there will be a sun that shines and heals those who fear the Lord's name. These two images of fire, one which destroys and one which heals. And the difference between these two images is not external, as if there are two different sources of this fire, but instead it is internal. The distinction is the relationship with the Lord, which brings about a different interaction with this single flame, this single fire. For those who fear the Lord see the world differently. How they act, how they live, and how they move the world is different because everything is seen through the eyes of the Lord. Everything is seen through their fear of the Lord. And by fear of the Lord, I don't mean servile fear, fear that they're going to be punished, fear that they're going to be burned up by the fire of the Lord. But instead, it's that they see the Lord as Lord. They see him as the creator of all. They see everything in their lives under the governance and the guidance of the Lord. And so they order their lives in accordance with that reality. This fire from Malachi then, for them, is a fire of salvation, a fire of healing. It destroys the injustice and liberates them to live freely as adopted children of the Father. It's a fire which heals them by perfecting their souls as gold is refined by the refiner's fire. It perfects them, burning away their stubble so that they might shine brightly in the light of the Lord. Conversely, though, this same fire destroys the proud. The fundamental sin is pride. At the heart of all sin is pride. Because all sin is in some way us saying that I know what is right, not you, God. It is a pride that I know what is good in the world, that I create the world, that I order my life, that I order the design of my very being. They look upon the world and they see how they can manipulate it, how they can order it, and how they can transform it into the vision of their ideas. That is, the vision, the image of humanity, not the image of God. And to such a person, this fire of the Lord is utter destruction. Since God's purifying fire brings about the purity of his design, the purity of the image of God, and that can only but destroy that which is not in accordance with his plan. Our Lord continues this theme in our gospel. There he was in the temple of Jerusalem with a group of people gathered around as is so common for him. And some were speaking of the beauty of the temple, the votive offerings, the worship of the Lord that was occurring, and remarking on how wonderful this scene was. And in response, he told them that all that they saw would be destroyed. The stones of the temple would be toppled over, and nothing would be remained. And then a time of great trial and destruction would follow upon that. And here the Lord is quite precise in what he says will be destroyed. Because if they had looked upon what they saw with different eyes, they would have seen a different reality around them in the temple, an eternal reality, a reality which endures. 2 chapters earlier in the Gospel of Luke, and so chronologically we can say just a few days previously, was the Lord's triumphant entry into Jerusalem, what we celebrate on Palm Sunday. And immediately after this, he goes into the temple and he purifies it. And as he does so, our Lord said that this temple, the temple of Jerusalem, shall be a house of prayer, but that they had made it into a den of thieves. Now, what we will endure is prayer. The worship of the Lord will move from this temple into, in part what we celebrated last week, into the temples of the Lord, into the temple of the church. We see in the book of Revelation these eternal prayers and offerings offered in the eternal temple of God. This endures, but the worldly temple is destroyed. And as we heard from last week from the Gospel of John, in his account of the cleansing of the temple, Christ said, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up," as he referred to the temple of his body. And so the people, as they stand in the earthly temple, admired its beauty with worldly eyes. They were enamored with its beauty, with the power projected by the edifice and the sprawling complex of the temple, with the devout expressions of faith, the piety that they experienced. But they did not see what God saw, what Christ saw, that beauty fades and passes, that all constructions of man eventually decay, and that the hearts of humanity are fickle, and how quickly we reduce our love to mere external expressions as we remain cold and indifferent inside, and we just think the externals make up for that which is lacking inside. They did not see the new and eternal temple in the flesh of Christ that was standing just beside them. They did not see the glory of God dwelling in humanity. And since their gaze was fixed upon the external world and that which passes, he then goes on to reveal to them what would come in this world: war, natural destruction, famine, plague, and that his followers would be persecuted to the point of death and betrayed even by their loved ones. And the truth is that this has always been the case, and this will continue to be the case until Christ returns. For those who see with the eyes of the world can only see such things. They can only see human strife and the destruction brought about by natural occurrences. They can only see obstacles be conquered by human might, and they can only find those who look with the eyes of Christ as noxious and obstacles along the path to some future utopia that will always be somewhere further waiting to be brought about, as they seek to solve the problems of this world and so persecute them according to human wisdom. But for those who gaze with faith, they will secure their lives because they see the world rightly. They see the acts of God in the midst of the strife. They see that all things, and by this I mean all things, are bent to the will of God and are ordered toward God's ultimate triumph. For if there is a single thing which the demons and evil truly hate, it is that God uses even them in their evil for his own purposes of good, for nothing escapes the power of God. But only the one who has put on the mind of Christ, as St. Paul says elsewhere, and so sees with Christ's own eyes, can recognize this cosmic renewal. Now, even when we see the world within this light, that does not, though, mean that we do not have a role to play in this great drama, nor that we should not be concerned with the things of the world. St. Paul, in our second reading to his second letter to the Thessalonians, is quite clear. We are to quietly and productively work. There was a problem in the early community of Christians that people would just sit around talking to one another, waiting for God to do everything. They weren't concerned. That's God's problem now. And Paul squarely rebukes this. We are co-workers with Christ. We are called to freely cooperate with the Lord in this cosmic plan of redemption and triumph over sin and evil. And that means working diligently and peaceably wherever it is that you have found yourselves. We are not called to be busybodies or gossips, but from the very beginning of creation, we were instead instructed to tend and care for the garden of the world. Through our mundane labors, we are to show the rectitude of our life and act as points of light shining in the present darkness. Through our daily labors, we are to remember that Christ is the one who saves those around us. That if we are faithful to him in these small things, he will be faithful to us. And that even the smallest acts which we do work toward his grand and glorious plan. When we look upon our lives, though, do we really think that everything we do is part of God's divine and eternal plan? Or do we instead think that God picks and chooses to use some things and others, that some things are actually important, but some other things are not really important? For it is only when we look upon our lives with God's own eyes that we can see that everything in our lives is caught up in God's plan of glorious triumph, a plan which has spanned billions of years already and which will span an unknown number more. For like it or not, the burning gaze of God weaves all things to his will. The question is, do you look with the right eyes to see it?